building some mini tanks today. What's up everyone, I'm Koa of KNFS, where we anglers always learning, sharing knowledge about fishing and fishes, and today I want to show you how I build those mini little collection tanks that I use out in the field to get great photos of those small species. And I really believe that any angler that loves microfishing or going for these small species would just love the benefits of having a small little glass mini tank with them. Like today, I saw something go under this board, so I worked it, and I must have pulled up the prettiest, biggest blunt nose minnow male I've ever caught in my life. And so I'm just glad I had a little tank to get some video of that. And this Johnny Darter is not even an inch long, but I can get some great photos in this tank that I can carry in my pocket if I wanted. So I've worked with glass as a hobby for many years, so one day I just figured I'd start making my own mini tanks. I usually take a couple of my homemade tanks into the field when I know I'll be pulling small species, from itty bitty tanks to moderately sized tanks. And these tanks are sturdy and have endured many of my field expeditions. But I left my tanks in Virginia because I flew out to Illinois on a whim. As some of you know, I've been a big Colorado Avalanche fan for 26 years, so I'm here in Illinois so I could watch the Stanley Cup Finals with my father, and yes, I'm very happy with how that turned out. But I still fish wherever I am, so I needed to build some tanks before hitting the waters around here. I filmed this build just for you guys. We'll cover the supplies needed, how it's constructed, and then I'll share a couple of tips on how to use your glass tank, like what you should never forget with your tank. So mini tanks don't take up much space in your gear, and building your own tank isn't too hard, especially if you are already handy in any building crafts. It's great because you can build to the dimensions exactly as you want them. It's helpful to have small tanks for small species because it prevents the fish from moving around much while taking a photo. Really narrow tanks are useful so the fish can't turn around, but I actually prefer to make mine a bit wider so I can get my fingers in the tank of any size to set up that splayed out fin shot that I use in my guides. What's also great is that the final mini tanks don't have to be perfect. As long as you end up with clean, clear side panels, then you're good to go. Glass is better than acrylic tanks because anything plastic will scratch much more easily and become cloudy over time. Even if you're super careful with the outside of your acrylic tank, any fishes with spines will scratch up the inside of your plastic tanks in no time. So in the long run, your glass tanks will offer clearer panels for photos compared to acrylic. There's no one correct way to build these, but I'll show you the supplies needed and one of my methods to make tanks that involves the most simple of gear. The actual hands-on work that goes into this doesn't take up much time, but the process takes a day or more because we have to let the silicone dry in the various stages. So you're going to need a clear glass panel, and you'll pick this up at your local hardware store. Make sure it's not acrylic but glass. They look very similar. The size you get depends on the dimensions of the tanks you want to build. Today I just picked up a 2x2 panel of about 1/10 of an inch thickness, and this will end up making 6 nice tanks with glass to spare. 100% clear silicone. We're going to avoid using any toxic glues because that's not good for fishes. Professional tank builders avoid using any toxic glues or silicone with toxic additives, so we will too. Make sure your silicone doesn't have extras like a built-in mold killer. Glass cutter. This is probably the only specialty tool that you need to purchase that might not be in your garage. You can pick these up cheap at a local hardware store. They come in various types and shapes. The cheapest one they have will do you fine. Clamps. You'll at least want 1 clamp. 2 is even better. Trigger clamps or C-clamps will do fine. I typically use an angled clamp, but today we're going to use the clamps that are more typical in most garages. Sandpaper. Get a little bit of fine grit sandpaper, something around 220, 150 will do. Measuring device. Measuring will occur. Get a fine tip Sharpie that's needed for marking the glass. Rubbing alcohol and paper towels. This will clean the glass, and yes, it's definitely needed. Painter's tape helps just keep things clean and tidy, and you're gonna just wanna use any tape that doesn't leave much of a residue. Straight edge. If your measure isn't a straight edge, you'll need something long and flat for the cuts. Something plastic or wood or cork bottomed is best so you won't scratch the glass. Spare wood. Really, you need a couple of pieces of anything that has right angles and some tall edges. Your straight edge could work, but I just find spare wood is always around to use. Breaking pliers. This is also another specialty item for grabbing the glass during breaks. I often use my hands, but a good substitute that's in most garages are just adjustable wrenches. Flat blade. A flat blade will cut the tape and be helpful cleaning the glass. There's some items that are not needed but helpful. Gloves. Working with glass means you'll probably get some micro cuts. You can wear gloves to avoid this. Wax paper. Prevent some extra stick. Tweezers, long nose pliers, helpful in the last stages with the tape. So just start out by sketching out what size tanks you want to build. You'll have 5 panels for each tank, 2 long sides, 2 ends, and 1 bottom. You'll notice the bottom panel will be the length of the long panel, but the width will be the length of the shortest panel plus the width of the glass times 2. Find a hard, level, and clean area to work. If your surface isn't flat and clean, then you'll risk breaking or scratching the glass as you work on it. Clean your glass. This panel was really dirty, but a bit of water and a paper towel will clean off the dirt. I'll also use a bit of rubbing alcohol to denature any contaminants that might have gathered on it. Mark your glass for the first cuts. Typically, it's best to cut the larger panels of your larger tanks first. Prepare your straight edge for the cuts. Keep in mind that there's a distance between the blade on your cutter and what will lean against the straight edge. Cutting glass is fairly simple, but there are some tips to follow. A secure straight edge that's clamped down will help ensure your blade doesn't move off course when you cut, because eyeballing and freehanding straight lines is just not a good idea. Start as close as you can to the edge of one end and keep a firm, even pressure downwards in one direction while slightly pushing against your straight edge so you don't go off course, and never go back over a cut you just made. Breaking the glass along the cut is pretty simple, but it's better if you can apply an even pressure on both sides. So the edge of a table is nice. Sometimes the glass easily breaks for you on larger pieces, especially this thin glass. This is why you always keep a firm hand under anything not supported by the table in case a quick break happens. The breaking pliers really help with the smaller pieces. If you're new to cutting glass, then expect you'll probably mess up a couple pieces. That's okay. That's why you have extra glass. Use sandpaper to lightly sand the corners and edges of the glass. This is important because it removes most of the really sharp edges that could cut you easily that show up right after cutting. Make your first cuts for the 4 sides, but not the bottom. We'll do that bottom panel later. Make sure your cuts worked out. Imperfections are common when cutting glass. Little micro fractures along the edges will probably show up, and that's okay. This doesn't need to be perfect. So lightly etch the front side of the glass, only the thickness of where the other glass panel will meet up. This will help the silicone stick. Painter's tape isn't necessary, but it will really help things stay clean because silicone tends to get all over the place. I'm going to apply painter's tape along where the inside edges meet on each panel, leaving just a tiny bit of room between where the edges line up. Now we're going to tack our pieces together with silicone. This tacking could be accomplished with a super glue, but I'm not using glues because I just don't want to reinforce using any toxic materials in tanks. Small fishes are really susceptible to toxins that leach into the water, so that's why we stick with that 100% silicone. Secure one of your pieces of wood or the straight edge as I'm using here. Line up your largest panel on the table and push it square against that edge. It's helpful to tape this piece to the table. Then you'll add a thin layer of silicone along the entire edge of your smaller panel. You'll seat that square along your larger panel and then add the clamp with a gentle but firm enough pressure to achieve that right angle or 90-degree angle. You'll notice I'm using a bit of wax paper so the wood won't stick to the glass. You could use wax paper on the other side if you wanted to as well. Then just wait 15 minutes or even longer for the silicone to dry a little. I tack with silicone because I want a durable tank that'll last many years in my field work. Now that the glass is tacked, it's about adding the inside silicone strip. My silicone tacking didn't dry 100%, but that's fine. It still helps to keep the shape as I move into this step, and when it does dry, like I said, it just makes it such a much stronger tank. The glass can be adjusted in the sticky state if needed. Remove the painter's tape and reapply 2 new pieces of tape, except these pieces of tape need to leave some space for the new silicone to sit, maybe 1/10 or 2/10 of an inch on the inside edges of each panel for a tank this size. Then apply a line of silicone and just run your finger along the top of that silicone to give it an even consistency along the line. Remove the tape and see how it looks. Use the rubbing alcohol to clean up any silicone that got where it shouldn't have. Since the angle looks just right to snug up against the straight edge, I'm not going to clamp it. If it were leaning, I would clamp it again. Repeat the steps we did for attaching the first side panel just on the other side. I'll show you one more time. I'm clamping this one for the final dry because it was leaning a bit. If everything is looking good, get your other long panel and figure out the best fit. Sometimes with our human error, flipping the piece around might be best. You'll notice I've marked which side is the top because I feel this side is the worst side. There are some imperfections in the glass that I'd prefer be near the top instead of the bottom. On the bottom is where we want the flattest, most even connections. Tacking the last side panel. So here we want to add some tape to prevent the silicone smearing to the 4 areas that will be near the silicone, and then apply some silicone to the edges of the small panels. Place the large piece on top and move it around until you have it lined up as best you can. Instead of using clamps, this part is more easily accomplished with a piece of wood and some weight on top. I put the rubbing alcohol on the wood for weight. Silicone the corners. After this tacking is somewhat dry, add a couple pieces of tape on the outside of the glass to just keep it from moving. Remove the old tape on the inside and reapply the new tape that will mask the lines for the final silicone along the inside corners. Apply the silicone to each corner. Spread it with a finger or pen and remove the tape. Then let it dry. Another way to do this. With smaller tanks, these inside silicone strips aren't really necessary because they don't hold much weight. If your cutting was straight and your silicone tacking was good enough with an even spread, then the tank should hold water just fine for the quick photos in the field. You can test your tank for leaks, and if there are some, just re-add some silicone along the connecting spots from the outside. It is a much faster build, but without those inside strips of silicone, that tacking, your structure will definitely be weaker. So back to the main build. Now we need to cut the bottom panel, and you can do this 2 ways. Either cut it to the original dimensions you drew up, making sure to include the width of the glass in those measurements, or you can trace it onto the glass with a Sharpie. And tracing is a good idea because sometimes our build went a bit off course. Our 4 panels might not have been put together square at all sections. I will trace here even though this tank is actually going together exactly on plan. Just make sure the side you trace is the side you end up attaching it to. Again, we want the bottom side to be our best, flattest side, so it'll snug up cleaner to that bottom panel. I'm going to apply painter's tape along where the inside edges meet on each panel, leaving just a tiny bit of room between where the edges line up. Now we're going to tack our pieces together with silicone. If the bottom panel looks good, it's now about applying tape for the final silicone. Again, tape isn't necessary if you just want to do your final silicone application freehand. It just gets really messy. So applying tape here is a bit trickier. I like to angle the corners of the tape using the blade before placing them in. Then we'll want to apply each piece on top of the other in one direction, because when we remove this tape, we will be pulling it off in the reverse direction. Apply the silicone and then even it out as best you can. Remove the tape and let it dry. So my silicone job got a bit sloppy because I didn't even it out well in that little area. And so I'm going to tidy it up a bit. Since the air is on the bottom, I'm not too worried. If it were on the side, I would really invest more in cleaning it up or even redoing that silicone strip. So another option, like I'm doing on this other smaller tank, is to put on the bottom panel before putting on the last large side panel. And this makes the tape work and silicone work much easier for connecting 3 of the 4 sides of the bottom panel. But back to our main build here. After your silicone is dry, it's time to see if you have any leaks and really make sure it is dry. I suggest you wait the full cure time of your silicone, which is 8 hours for this brand. This one looks spot on without any leaks. If you do have a leak, that's okay. Just mask the area around that leak and apply some more silicone. When all is good, just clean any leftover Sharpie marks and smears of silicone with the rubbing alcohol and the flat razor blade. Just don't mess with the good silicone in the corners. So making smaller tanks can be done by the exact same procedures. I try to get as many tanks building as I can at once. So the last step is to just go out and field test your tanks. You'll have great photos of your catches as you use these tanks for years to come. So some tips for your tanks. These tanks are strong, but keep in mind that it is still glass. You'll want a secure way to travel with them that also protects them. So right now I've just borrowed some boxes temporarily with some washcloths. With my tanks in Virginia, I actually designed them to stack within each other, separated by washcloths, because glass can scratch glass, and those claws are the must-have side piece for your tank. And not just because it protects them when you're traveling, but because you will need to wipe condensation and water droplets off the front of your tanks before any photo. Any fish will likely splash around a bit, and you'll need a clean rag to wipe all those droplets and condensation off the glass to get those wonderful clean photos. It's usually a good idea to have your tank set up somewhere before you start catching fish, and sometimes that's the hardest part, is just finding a nice flat area. Also remember to change the water frequently. You want it to be as oxygenated as possible and just about the same temperature as the water you just pulled your fish from. This really helps avoiding shocking the fish. This method works great for any half-gallon, maybe 3/4-gallon tanks, but anything bigger, then you have to think about designing a bottom frame support system because the weight becomes a lot. Fish responsibly and good luck, and if you do build some of these tanks and use them, tag me on iNaturalist and let me know.